Worse, the bad news is that we have borrowed privately $2.5 trillion just in the last 90 months. And the worst news is that 1.67 trillion of that is coming from foreign investors. There are two consequences of that I'll mention in a minute that are obvious. Now, how did we get to where we are all of a sudden? A couple of weeks ago, the Treasury Secretary and the Federal Reserve Bernanke chairman came and said we were facing imminent collapse. Most people agree that when the housing bubble burst and you had default mortgages resulting in a write-down of mortgages across the spectrum, mortgage-based securities and so forth, trillions of dollars were lost in the mark-to-market and so on. And the fellow next week can maybe explain this in more detail. But then all of a sudden you had this conflagration throughout the world, particularly Europe and the United States, and you had a credit crunch that literally dried up the liquidity. And so what had to take place pretty quickly was something. We had a very, very difficult vote. There was not a good vote on the so-called bailout 2 weeks ago. A no vote, in my judgment, was not a good vote for the reason that it sends the wrong message to the international community, not the domestic community. A yes vote was not a very appetizing vote when most of the calls, I sure see Coleman's calls the same as mine, 600 to 1 against bailing out these high flyers on Wall Street. Well, we did manage to put in the House, and the Senate accepted what we call a recoupment clause. It basically said that at the end of the day, after the buying of these underwater securities, there'll be an accounting, and to the extent there's a shortfall in Treasury, there will be a fee placed on the industry eligible for the program over time to recoup that to the Treasury, so we could get away from this idea that it was a bailout of some bad actors. The obvious consequences of our weakened financial condition are twofold. One is we are now, in my judgment, creating a financial vulnerability that is a national security matter. There are two things that make up national security: military power and financial stability. By our continued reliance and dependence on foreign investors to finance the operations of the United States government, in my view, will someday give them leverage that we don't want them to have over our policymakers in the future. And the second consequence of our continued dependence on deficit spending is the transferring of our tax base from things that will keep this country competitive, programs in health, education, military, infrastructure, and so on. The spending that is going on now in Washington is interest spending. The Congressional Research Office estimates that there's an additional $131 billion a year in spending that was not present when we were breaking even. You can see that this is real spending. The second fastest, or third fastest item in the federal government in terms of growth is interest. Only behind defense and some of the Medicare and Social Security. So what I think we have to do as a country, and I hope that both of the candidates for president will at least address some of these tomorrow night, or at least whenever the debate again this week. We're certainly going to encourage both of them to look at it. Is we've got to make some hard decisions as a people. The financial path we're on is unsustainable. With the baby boomers and all of the other things that are going on, we simply cannot continue to do what we've been doing. And that may be a complete restructuring of the government. It may include any number of things, but we've got to have people tell us, and I think the American people will respond. We always have, to the fact that we cannot continue on the path we're going down financially. Let me pivot just one quick second, please, to NATO. NATO is one of those organizations that will never work on paper. Can you imagine a 26-nation alliance that is dependent solely on consensus to get something done? If you put that on paper, people say it never possibly work, but it actually manages to do a few good things right in practice. And it is now engaged in transforming itself from a static defense-oriented military organization to basically a global, as Harry Montgomery knows, a more global-looking response force to what is happening around the world. It is the only truly international organization that can bring order out of chaos somewhere where it needs to be and back it up with a military capability. The United Nations is a good place to go and talk about it. The United Nations is incompetent and incapable of going to a chaotic situation where it's necessary to be and bringing that with a military capability, bringing order there. And so what we're doing with NATO in Afghanistan is basically the largest expedition outside of the continent of Europe that NATO's ever undertaken. NATO will survive Afghanistan. The question is, what will it look like if we do not do all that we can to make Afghanistan a success? The NATO PA will meet again in Spain in November, at which time we will discuss not only Afghanistan, but also take up the very troubling developments with respect to the belligerent attitude of Russia in Eastern Europe. This, we hope, will be a place that we can do some things to relieve some of the tension in Georgia and Ukraine as it relates to Russia. I know it's 1 o'clock, and I apologize. I was asked to leave time for a question or two, so I'd be delighted